All right, so this is part 2 of the cardiovascular chapter. We're going to start with blood pressure. So number 4 under letter C, where it says heart contraction, blood pressure. So your blood pressure is a measurement of how much pressure is put on your blood vessels, and that's going to be related to your heart because your heart is pushing that blood through your blood vessels. So when you feel a surge, when the heart's in contraction or pushing the blood, you're going to have a surge of blood through the blood vessel walls or through the blood vessels, and then it's going to push on the walls of the blood vessels. So let's take a look at the pictures here and some terms that we have. So the first two terms, or I guess the letter, I guess it should be letter B, the second term in your outline, systole, and then the word diastole. Systole is the word when your heart muscles are contracting. Now, there are two separate heart muscles that we learn in anatomy. The muscle of your atria don't count in terms of your blood pressure because the atria don't push the blood to your body. When you're talking about blood pressure, you're really talking about the ventricles because the ventricles are pushing the blood into your body, and specifically really the left side. So the left ventricle is responsible for your systemic blood pressure. So when you say systole or your systolic blood pressure, that's the pressure on the artery walls when your ventricles are contracting and actively pushing that blood. Okay, and then the word diastole is the blood pressure when your ventricles are relaxed and there's not that surge of blood through your blood vessels. So when you take a look at this picture here, right, you have your blood moving through your arteries, and that pressure as they push along the walls, that's your blood pressure. And so what they measure with this thing here called a I can't even say it, sphingomanometer, is basically when you have the cuff, you push on the blood vessel itself, so you completely collapse the blood vessel and no blood is running through it. And then you gradually release the pressure and you gradually allow the blood to run back through the cuff. And so the highest pressure is going to be the pressure when the heart is pushing, right? So the systolic pressure is the first number on the blood pressure, is when there's enough pressure that you can actually have some blood moving through that collapsed vessel. And then you're going to hear that running through there. Then you, as you release the blood pressure cuff, you're going to have that pushing mechanism by your heart disappear on you, and you're not going to hear that sound anymore. This detail that I'm telling you right here is not that important. I'm not going to test you on that. However, just know that there's a relationship between hearing the pulse through this artery and your blood pressure, okay? So when you get your blood pressure taken, the first number, 120, this is a normal sort of adult blood pressure, 120/80. The 120 refers to the systolic blood pressure. It's a higher number because there's more force exerted on the walls of your arteries. And then when your ventricles are relaxed and there's not a surge of blood, you're going to have a lower pressure. You're still going to feel some pressure along the walls of your arteries, just not as large as when the heart's contracting. So the diastolic blood pressure is between those systolic squeezes, okay? And so that's what gives you sort of that range of, the force on the artery walls. So why is that important, right? So it turns out that when you have excessive pressure, if there's a lot of pressure on the walls of your arteries, that can actually damage and cause little micro tears or micro roughened areas that cause damage to the lining of your arteries. When that happens, it's more likely that you're going to get fatty deposits building up in there, so plaque buildup from cholesterol and saturated fats in your diet. They can actually build up within the walls. So if you initially harm the blood vessel walls, you're more likely to get these deposits. And so high blood pressure is linked to coronary artery disease. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rearrange this lecture. I do talk about cardiovascular disease right before the respiratory system, but since we're on this subject right now, I'm going to go ahead and talk about it here. because it's related exactly to this picture here. So cardiovascular disease, otherwise known as CAD, or the C can also stand for coronary artery disease. The coronary arteries are these arteries that feed the heart. If you watch the animation, then they do highlight these coronary arteries. These are extremely important to give the heart blood because the heart itself is a working organ. It's constantly needing blood. It's constantly needing oxygen. And these are the major, only two of them, major delivery methods to the heart. So if these are blocked, you're going to have a problem in receiving blood. And then, so in this picture here, there's a blockage in this area. Everything from that point on is going to get starved of oxygen. And so that area is going to die, and that's a heart attack. Okay, so what is cardiovascular disease? It's a disease that happens in your arteries, just like we looked at in the last picture, right? We have plaque buildup in the walls of your arteries. And this is a histology slide. So this is a real artery. So the space where blood flows through is called the lumen. And this you can see is a normal, healthy, wide lumen. When you start to build up plaque within the walls, you start to narrow the amount of blood that can come through. And that's going to be a problem. It happens gradually. So this is kind of another way of looking at it, right? So this can take decades, 20, 30 years for this to build up to become a problem. And I want you guys to notice something, that the plaque, which is cholesterol and fatty deposits like saturated fats, they get swept under the rug. So you have this lining of the heart here that's normal and healthy. And then the fats, this plaque, is put underneath that. So it's literally like putting it under a rug, which makes it difficult to remove, right? Because if you think, oh, you have clogged arteries, why can't we just go in there and suck out the plaque? Well, you can't because it's underneath healthy tissue. You don't want to damage that healthy tissue. And your body doesn't know what's happening, right? Over those 10, 20, 30 years that this is gradually building up. Problems occur when the plaque can erupt. So you can actually break through that lining, okay, what I call the rug, and then the plaque comes out. When that happens, your body thinks you have a bleed and you're trying to fix it with a blood clot. And you can see here's a blood clot forming. When that happens, you're going to make that lumen tiny or even completely block it. So you're going to block the blood flow going through that blood vessel. If this happens in your heart, it's a heart attack. If this happens in your brain, it's called a stroke. Okay, so these are very serious outcomes with cardiovascular disease. So I have in the notes myocardial infarction is the clinical term for a heart attack, and now you know exactly what that is. It is complete blockage of a blood vessel in the heart where the heart muscle dies. That's actually an important part of a heart attack. The heart muscle dies from lack of oxygen, and that's what is heart attack. Okay, so that's really serious, and that's this gradual buildup of plaque within the walls of your coronary arteries here. But really, this can happen anywhere in the body. Okay, I'll show you the animation at the end of this talk, but I also want you to show you these two treatments. So there's treatments for cardiovascular disease or coronary artery disease, and one of them, these are very, very common. So one's called balloon angioplasty. What happens is they'll find the blockage, so they can do a little test and they can go through and they can look at the flow of blood through your heart's coronary arteries. If there's a narrowing in an area, then they can widen that area with this balloon angioplasty. So what they do is they take a catheter, which is a long tube, and they can go through usually this big blood vessel here in your thigh. They put it all the way up and go to your heart. When they find the blockage, they actually, here's your catheter, right? They blow up a balloon, right? It's a balloon catheter, so they blow it up and they literally just push the sides of the artery wall to make it bigger, to flatten the plaque. Then they have a stent, which is this wire mesh that they put in place, and then they leave it there. So the mesh stays in your body for life. And then that holds the blood vessel open so that you can have normal blood flow going through, okay? So that's balloon angioplasty. That is not as severe a treatment as this next one I'll tell you. The next treatment for coronary artery disease is called bypass surgery. So this is when the blockages are so severe that they are not going to be fixed with balloon angioplasty. So you have to create a brand new road that bypasses the blockage. That's why it's called bypass surgery. So what they'll take is basically other blood vessels from your body. So this one's using a thing called a saphenous vein. This one's called an internal mammary artery. You don't need to know those, but they leave this alone. So don't think that they clean this up or remove it. That stays. But what they do is they just create another pathway. So they bypass the blockage. The blood is going to come up the aorta, right? It can't go through this anymore. It's blocked. So it's going to, as the blood comes up, it just goes a little higher. It comes into this tube, and this tube will bypass the blockage. So this area of the heart will get blood where it didn't get the blood last time, or in the, with the blockage. Here's another big blockage. This is a very common blockage, actually, this really big blood vessel in the front of the heart. And then here's another bypass. Okay, so the thing with bypass surgery, again, is that they don't actually remove the blockage. They don't do anything with this. They just create an alternate route with blood vessels from your own body. Okay, so that's bypass. And this is, you can have a single bypass surgery. This is showing you a double bypass surgery, triple bypass, quadruple bypass. They just do however many you need. If you guys know David Letterman, he had a quadruple bypass done years ago. I don't know, but anyways, so that's coronary artery disease and the treatments for that artery disease. So let's now return back to our blood vessels and talk about our arteries, arterials, so letter D. So the definition of an artery, again, was blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart. In the system, right, in your systemic circuit, your arteries will be red because they're carrying oxygenated blood to your organs. When arteries become smaller, they're called arterioles. Okay, so arterioles are just smaller arteries. And then when they branch, every time blood vessels branch, they get smaller and smaller until they hit the smallest of all, which is the capillary. Okay, so number 2. Capillaries are colored purple because that's where gas exchange happens. So we're losing the oxygen to the tissues. We're picking up carbon dioxide from the tissues. The blood, also other things, right? So if the blood is carrying nutrients, it's bringing nutrients to the cells, and waste products are moving away from the cells into the bloodstream. So this is where the exchange happens. Now, this is important. The gas exchange and nutrient exchange does not happen in arteries. It does not happen in arterioles. It does not happen in venules. It does not happen in veins. It only happens in capillaries because these are the only blood vessels that are thin enough where the walls are so thin that this diffusion can take place. Everything else, the walls are too thick. When the blood, when the blood is finished diffusion, there is a pressure change where the blood will continue on and collect into a larger vein, slightly larger than capillaries, but they're called venules. So venules are small veins, and then those venules will bring the blood to the larger veins. Eventually, right, all of the veins in your body will drain into the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, leading to the heart. So you can see that your blood vessels have many layers to them. You don't need to worry about those layers, but you want to know that arteries bring blood away from the heart, veins bring blood towards the heart. And if you've ever thought about it, how is the blood from your feet moving to your heart, right? Because everything needs to go back to your heart. If you're laying down at night or if you are standing up a lot of the day, like how does that blood move against gravity to go back up to your heart? Interesting question. It turns out that the way that the blood moves is through skeletal muscle contraction. And veins will have a special feature called valves inside. So remember, valves prevent backflow. Any valve in your body, whether it's in the heart, whether it's in your vessels or anywhere else, they prevent backflow. So there's a valve here, there's a valve here, so here's a section of the vein. Every time you move, your skeletal muscles or just the force of your organs or just, just the physical motion of your body will compress the blood vessel, will compress the vein. The blood is going to get pushed, right? So it can go up or down, but it doesn't go down because it can't, because as the blood is squished in this downward way, the valve is shut. So the only way that valves open is in this upward motion. So every time you move your body, a little bit of blood is going to move to the next segment of a vein, and then the valve will shut behind it so it can't go back. So your event, like every time you move, even the breathing motion of your chest, right? Every time you move, you're going to allow that blood to move a little bit towards the heart, and the valves prevent the backflow. So that's the way your blood eventually moves back to the heart in your veins. I have varicose veins, letter C, in your outline. So I don't have a picture of varicose veins, but varicose veins are basically when your valves are not working anymore in your veins. And so let's say this one is allowing blood to go back. What will happen is this area will fill up with more blood than it should, right? Because this is not preventing any backflow. So that's going to make this part of the vein expand and get bigger, and it'll balloon out. And for superficial veins, you can start to see them as bulges or as purple areas under the skin, right? Because the veins right under your skin, if you have varicose veins, you can see them because they're bigger than they should be, and that's because of the faulty valves. All right. So let's talk about some concept checks. Okay, so diffusion occurs across which blood vessels? Pause to think about it. But the answer is letter D, capillaries. All right, so let's talk about blood. For blood, there are two parts of blood. There's the plasma, number one, in your outline, which is water. It's basically water and all the tiny little molecules that are dissolved in that water, the nutrients, the gases, things like that. And then there are formed elements, and these are either cells or parts of cells. So the cells are red blood cells, white blood cells, and then platelets are actually not whole cells, but they are little parts of cells. So let's talk about plasma. So plasma, again, is the watery component. 90% of your blood is plasma. Dissolved nutrients. It contains proteins, it contains antibodies, and clotting factors. Antibodies are important for your immune system. Right now, with coronavirus being in the news, there's a lot of talk about antibody tests. And so antibodies are made by your immune cells, and they are little proteins that circulate in your body, and you only make antibodies after you've been infected by something. So that's why for coronavirus, they're looking to see whether or not you've been infected by looking for the antibody to coronavirus, and you only make antibodies after you've been infected to that specific pathogen. The example I have, clotting factors, the example I have for you, fibrinogen and fibrin, that is a clotting factor. So it's seen here in this picture, this stringy brown stuff. That is a method. So when you have a cut in a blood vessel and you're bleeding, your body has clotting factors. It has platelets, which helps clot too. So platelets plus clotting factors plus fibrin will help clot your blood. So there's many components to forming a blood clot. If any one component's not present, you can have problems clotting the blood. But I want to mention the fibrinogen to fibrin. Fibrinogen is inactive. So think about your body never knows when it's going to need to clot the blood because you never know exactly when you're going to get a cut. So there's always circulating clotting factors in your bloodstream, but inactivated, right? They don't want to be active because you don't want to have abnormal clots build up here and there. So they're only activated when there is a cut. And so the inactive form of fibrin is called fibrinogen, and fibrinogen gets converted to the active form fibrin only when there's a cut. All right. So let's talk about formed elements. Number two, letter A, erythrocytes, is this guy here. So let's go back to this picture. So this is a red blood cell or an erythrocyte. So you should know both words, red blood cells and erythrocytes, written in your outline. These are the cells that carry oxygen, and they do so because of a special protein inside called hemoglobin. This is the picture of hemoglobin that is how your book draws it out. It actually contains 4 separate protein subunits. So if you remember back to proteins, proteins can have a quaternary structure, which is different subunits coming together to make a whole protein. So this is what hemoglobin has 4 subunits, the 2 dark purple and the 2 light purple here that come together, and each subunit has a heme group, which is this turquoise disc, and then inside the heme group there is an iron atom. Okay, so iron is critically important here because it is what attaches oxygen, right? So here's hemoglobin without oxygen. It goes in, this is inside your red blood cells. You have millions of these inside of one red blood cell. So there's lots of hemoglobin in your body. When it goes to your lungs, it picks up oxygen. So the oxygen doesn't go anywhere else. It binds to iron. Okay, if you don't have iron, you're not going to carry oxygen. So that's a problem, okay, which I talk about. So iron is critically important to carry oxygen. It binds the oxygen. And then when it gets farther away from your lungs and your heart, the hold that iron has on the oxygen gets less and less, and so it actually diffuses away when it reaches your body tissues. So this is how hemoglobin works, okay? And anemia is where you're lacking oxygen carrying capacity in your body. So your blood can't carry enough oxygen. There's different ways you can become anemic. The most common way is low iron. So where do you get iron? You get iron in your diet, right? You can't make iron up. Your body can't do that. So you have to eat iron every day to keep that iron level up. And there's foods that are rich in iron that you can look up. But if you don't have enough iron, then you become anemic, which means that your oxygen carrying capacity has diminished. You're not able to carry enough oxygen around. What's oxygen for? Why is oxygen so important for our bodies? If you remember back to the beginning of the semester, we talked about cellular respiration, right? We need oxygen because our mitochondria use it in the cellular respiration, that electron transport chain. Oxygen is needed to accept that final electron and make ATP. Okay, so that's basically it, make ATP. So if you don't have oxygen going to your cells, you don't make as much ATP, which is energy. And so one of the classic symptoms of anemia is being tired because you're just not able to make energy anymore. If you are anemic because of low iron, it's an easy fix. Get some iron, either eat foods rich in iron or you can take iron supplements. But that's anemia. And you do have, I have on the outline too, that there is an EPO is a hormone, and I'll tell you the name, it's erythropoietin, but it's always called EPO. But EPO is a hormone that actually helps your body make more red blood cells. And so if you are losing blood, like you're bleeding profusely, or a woman is on her period, there's a menstrual cycle happening, there's excessive or there's more blood loss than normal, so your body will put out erythropoietin to stimulate more red blood cell production. So I put down EPO doping because this is actually quite common, or has been common, where athletes that need to depend on like endurance sports, so if you want a lot of oxygen going to your body, like running or cycling or swimming, if you have more red blood cells, you're going to be more, you're going to have a little bit of a edge, right? Because you can have more oxygen in your blood, oxygen giving your cells energy. So people will actually cheat by taking that hormone erythropoietin so they can bulk up on their red blood cells. Kind of an interesting little side there. Anyways, so let's look at our next cell, leukocytes. Okay, let's just go back here. So leukocytes are known as white blood cells. They fight infection. Okay, so leukocytes, if you know anybody or have heard of a leukemia, that is from that word leukocyte, because leukemia is a cancer of white blood cells. So leukocytes are responsible for fighting infection and also producing those antibodies, like I said. And then lastly, platelets. So platelets are for clotting. Okay, so anytime you bleed, this is going to stop the bleeding. But of course, it also works with the clotting factors, and you also need fibrin to really form a stable clot. Hemophilia is a disorder we talked about with the genetics unit. Hemophilia is a disorder where people cannot clot because they're missing clotting factors. Okay, so clotting factors is a real thing. It's not just a blanket word. There's several different kinds of clotting factors, and people with hemophilia don't make one or two of them. And you can just bleed for longer. You don't bleed more, but the bleed that you have just lasts a lot longer, or it never stops bleeding. So it's a problem with that. That's hemophilia. Okay, so I think we've covered everything here. For this matching, you can pause it here, but you should come up with the answers, which to go. Platelets is going to be letter B. Plasma is going to be letter C. RBC, or red blood cells, will be letter A, and white blood cells, WBC, would be letter D. All right, so we're going to stop here.